Welcome and thank you for being here today. Today we'll be hearing from Redmond Police Chief Darrell Lowe, as well as Washington State Patrol Captain Ron Mead, regarding the arrest of Richard Sherman. After their comments, we will open it up for questions. Chief Lowe.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Darrell Lowe, D-A-R-R-E-L-L-L-O-W-E, the police chief for the city of Redmond, Washington. So this morning at approximately 1:49 a.m., Redmond Police received a 911 call from the occupants in the 18100 block of Northeast 30th Street, indicating a family member who did not reside at the residence was trying to break in. Officers responded and made contact with Richard Sherman. Officers attempted to de-escalate the situation and gain voluntary compliance from Mr. Sherman. Mr. Sherman physically resisted officers' efforts to take him into custody, and a Redmond K-9 was deployed to assist in gaining control of Mr. Sherman. Mr. Sherman was eventually taken into custody. Both Mr. Sherman and the officers sustained minor injuries as a result of the altercation and the K-9 deployment. Mr. Sherman was treated at a local hospital for his injuries and booked into the King County Jail. He was booked for residential burglary with a domestic violence component, resisting arrest, and malicious mischief. The domestic violence component results from Mr. Sherman's relationship with the occupants of the residence, not due to him physically assaulting his significant other. The malicious mischief is the result of damage he caused to the door of the residence. And with that, I'll take questions. Sir.
So, an element of the residential burglary crime is that he intended to cause, or intended to commit a crime against a person or the property they're in. So is that element satisfied by the damage to the door, or is there any other indication that he intended to commit further crimes inside?
So the malicious mischief charge is a result of damage that he caused to the physical property, and then his attempt to gain entry into a residence that was not his constitutes the burglary aspect of it.
What kind of damage it was?
I do not.
Do you know what his motive was?
I do not.
But you're certain he was trying to get inside?
Yes, I am.
Were there injuries to any other people? You mentioned Richard and a policeman having injuries. Anybody else involved?
No, just Mr. Sherman and the officers involved in the altercation sustained minor injuries.
Was he able to actually gain entry into the house at any point, breach the door?
He did not gain entry into the residence.
Your 911 dispatchers, I trust, stayed on the phone with people inside. Did they identify Mr. Sherman at the time as trying to get into the house?
He was identified in the call, yes.
Can you be more specific about the family relationship?
As I understand it, these are the ex-in-laws of Mr. Sherman.
Was there any kind of violation of any kind of restraining order pending that you understand was happening at the time?
Not in Redmond, no.
How much time
Does that mean that there is a restraining order or a protection order of some kind filed somewhere else?
I believe that there may be an emergency protective order in place.
How much time between first contact and then being deployed?
I understand it was in excess of 10 minutes.
Was the protective order for a former spouse or for the in-laws? Former in-laws?
The details of the protective order I'm not aware of, did not pertain to the incident here in Redmond.
Can you just describe what sorts of de-escalation tactics the officers used, and sort of at what point was it clear that that wasn't going to work?
So, as I understand it, the officers parked a distance away from the location and approached on foot. Once they made contact with Mr. Sherman, they spoke with him. I'm told that even joked with him. One of the officers involved in a prior occupation had contact with Mr. Sherman and shared that story and experience with him. So it kind of ran the gamut of why they were there and previous contacts with him.
Chief, can you go back to the DAV component? And I think that, if I heard you right, that you said that was because of the relationship of the people in the home as a family relationship, not because of domestic violence. But does that DAV also go to this, I'm sorry, did you call it a restraining order or a protection order?
So the domestic violence component for the incident that occurred in Redmond is as a result of the relationship between Mr. Sherman and his former in-laws.
Chief, if we could back up a little bit, you mentioned the initial interaction between Sherman and the responding officer as this being somewhat amicable. At what point did it turn?
So there was conversation between Mr. Sherman and the officers present at the point in time where the officers had established their probable cause in order to effect the arrest of Mr. Sherman. At the point in time that he was notified that he was going to be placed under arrest is when, I'll say, the situation turned.
Can you describe what happened from that point?
As far as?
Was there pushing, shoving? I mean, what did he do to qualify resisting arrest? Or at what point did it get physical? And you mentioned the K-9 deployed, like, kind of take us from there on.
So as I understand it, at the point in time, Mr. Sherman was advised that he was going to be placed under arrest. He attempted to walk away from the officers and at a point accelerated his pace. At the point in time that the officers made physical contact with him, he resisted. An altercation occurred, and then subsequently a K-9 was deployed to gain or to assist in gaining compliance and taking him into custody.
Sir, was there any evidence of violence against the resident?
He did not make entry into the residence, so there was no So there was no assault between Mr. Sherman and the occupants of the residence.
And again, to be clear, the domestic violence specification just because of the relation, not whether it gets done in the building.
Correct. The domestic violence component is as a result of the relationship between the occupants and Mr. Sherman, not because he physically assaulted anyone during any family member or significant other during this event.
Was there any communication between Mr. Sherman and the people inside?
Yes, I believe there was verbal altercation between the occupants of the residence and Mr. Sherman prior to the arrival of the police.
And they made it clear that he was not welcome there?
Yes, sir.
You said, is there any way to clarify the relationship? I mean, this is Richard and his ex-wife residence?
As I understand it, this would have been his ex-wife's parents' residence.
There's a significant amount of security cameras at this residence. Are they cooperating with you, and have you seen that footage?
The family is cooperating with the investigation, and if there is video footage, I'm sure they will make that available to us at the appropriate time.
Is there any indication if the ex-wife was inside the house?
I'm not aware if she was.
And were there, I think we heard there were signs of intoxication on the part of Mr. Sherman. Can you expound on that at all?
At this point in time, I cannot. I was told that there was a odor of an intoxicant being emitted from his breath in person.
There's 2 miles between where the car was located and where this residence is at. Is it believed that he walked that distance, or did he get some help from somebody else to drive to that location?
I am unsure exactly how he got from the location where his vehicle was found, but it is, I'll say, speculated that he did walk from that location.
Do we know what hospital he was taken to, and can you clarify what injuries he might have sustained?
I do not know which hospital. I'm told it was a minor laceration to the lower leg and ankle area as a result of the canine contact.
Chief, were there children in the house?
I'm not sure of the occupants of the residence. What I do know is that there were at least 4 adults present in the location. I'm unclear if children were present or not.
What can you tell us the escalation of force, the way your officers are trained? You know, we hear a lot about tasers, use of other less than legal restraining devices and that kind of thing. At what point does it go from physical altercation to the canine? Is that step 1?
So, in a physical altercation, it's not a checklist or a pyramid. It's a fluid situation. In this particular circumstance, for us, our canine is deployed as part of our overnight staffing. So the canine officer would have responded as a backup officer. Obviously, the dog is a tool that can be utilized. And because of the physical altercation, the decision was made to deploy the canine to gain, and taking Mr. Sherman into custody.
I'm sorry to ask this again. Would you go back to protection order versus restraining order? What do you know about that and who that pertains to?
So I do not have details of that. I'll say that the chatter that's been out around this since the arrest, I understand that there may be a protective order, but to my knowledge, it is not involving the family or the location here in Redmond, so I can't give you details about that.
Do you know where they fell?
I do not.
Was 911 called when he arrived at the residence, or was it when people thought he may be coming? You know that part of when 911 called?
So I believe the 911 call was made once Mr. Sherman got to the residence and attempted to force entry inside.
Do people know why he was there, what he wanted?
His motivation or reasoning or reasons for going to the house are unclear at this point in time.
Is the 911 call publicly available?
It will be, if you make the public records request, then those will be fulfilled, as they come in.
Can you hear the bill on the initial call that happened prior in the evening? I mentioned, I think, in the earlier release, described there was an anticipation Mr. Sherman was heading to that direction. What were you told?
What were you told by whom? I'm not clear on your question, sir.
So 911 describing
Yep.
that Sherman was heading that way. And the next piece of information in the release describes incidents occurring 2 hours later. Can you describe the nature of both of those calls? Who reached out? What did they tell you?
I'm unclear on who made the 911 calls. I can speak to what occurred once the residents called. Clearly, things occurred prior to Mr. Sherman arriving, to include him being involved in a collision on 520. So that information may have been provided to us. I'm unclear as to the sequence of events.
You mentioned one of the officers in a prior line of work had, or before he was an officer, had some, before he or she was an officer, had some interaction with Sherman. Do you have any more details? Do you know anything more about that?
So as I understand it, it was actually one of the troopers that was on scene in a previous job. He was a valet and had contact with Mr. Sherman in that context.
Can we hear from State Patrol with regard to how this?
Absolutely.
Is there any further questions for Chief Lowe? I'm happy to let him take this, but my name is Ron Mead. I'm a captain with Washington State Patrol, and I serve as the commander of District 2, which encompasses all of field operations here in King County. At 1:26 a.m. this morning, our dispatch center received a 911 call reporting a possible impaired driver that had entered a closed construction zone, eastbound 520, just before the exit to 148th. At some point in the next 2 minutes, the vehicle had left eastbound on 520 and discovered a short distance away in a commercial parking lot. The plate returned to Mr. Richard K. Sherman as the owner of the vehicle. When the vehicle was located, it had pretty significant driver's side damage from an impact with the barrier as it left the construction zone. Troopers began searching the area looking for the driver of the vehicle for suspicion of DUI. And at some point were redirected to an address in Redmond, and later learned Redmond PD was in the process of looking for Mr. Sherman for an unrelated event. Troopers assisted the Redmond Police Department with the arrest of Mr. Sherman at the residence following extensive de-escalation and tactics that were employed leading up to the arrest. Subsequent to Mr. Sherman's arrest, the Washington State Patrol troopers involved applied for and obtained a search warrant and conducted a legal blood draw. Those results are pending. And Mr. Sherman remained in the custody of the Redmond Police Department where he was booked into jail on the Redmond charges, and the misdemeanor charges of DUI and hit and run will be referred. Any questions?
Can you be more specific about the damage to the vehicle? At one point, I think we heard that four of the tires.
Yeah, my understanding is that the left side of the driver's side of the vehicle had pretty extensive damage. One of the tires sustained nearly completely separated, and the vehicle was operated until it literally couldn't operate any longer, and that's when it was located in a parking lot about a half mile from the scene, and it was from there that the troopers started trying to locate the driver.
And then just to be clear, I think you mentioned the construction zone. Was this on
Yeah, the construction zone in question was on 520. My understanding is there was a closed lane that was, a lane that was closed off, restricted to vehicular traffic for construction. Somehow the vehicle entered that lane and was contacted by one of the construction crew members, a subcontractor for the State Department of Transportation. They identified the driver, believed that he was impaired, and then subsequently called 911 to report that the vehicle had left. And it was that one of those crew members that actually located the vehicle a short distance away, subsequently called 911 to report the vehicle's current location, and troopers responded to that. There was about a 10-minute gap from the original report until the troopers first arrived with the vehicle. I mean, in that time period is when the driver was no longer at the vehicle.
What is that vehicle?
Are you releasing the make and model of the vehicle?
I don't have that, not a matter of not releasing, I don't have it. Is there a question over here?
It was eastbound, the damage was on the driver's side. Is that right?
Correct. He hit a barrier. It sounds like he hit some type of a barrier as he was leaving the construction zone. So whether it was a piece of construction barrier or just a jersey barrier, I don't have that.
Can you clarify what led to the suspicion of possible impairment?
Well, that was reported. I assume simply the observations of the civilian person that noted that, but when he called 911, he reported it as somebody that he believed to be impaired. And I think largely it was because of the observations and how he gets into a closed construction zone. We're very fortunate. I mean, these crews are out working at night at great risk to themselves. And here you have an impaired driver, or suspected impaired driver, that not only placed other motorists at risk, he placed those people that are doing construction at risk by entering a closed construction zone. So we're very fortunate that there were no injuries as a result of that piece of this.
So I'm sorry, did you say that he hit the barrier as he was leaving the
Yes.
construction zone? So there was no accident prior, he just kind of somehow...
Yeah, my understanding was he was contacted because he improperly entered the closed area, and that was when they noted the suspected impairment, and then called 911.
So did they,
I'm
sorry, did the people in the construction zone then actually witness the crash?
I don't know if they witnessed the crash. My understanding is they did observe the crash because they reported that. So
Did they flag him down to physically stop?
it sounds like that's the case.
And you said that they identified him, did they just recognize him as Richard Sherman?
I don't know if they identified him as Richard Sherman, but they identified him as as somebody driving the vehicle.
Captain, it was an active construction zone at that?
Yes. And it was on 520 there at 148th eastbound.
And you said the damage included some damage to the tire, that it had completely separated. Do you mean that the tire had like come off the rim, or the wheel itself?
I think some combination of that. It was just described to me as basically the front wheel nearly coming detached. So whether or not that was the wheel, whether it was the entire axle, I don't know. But it was significant enough that the vehicle became inoperable at some point within the first half mile of striking the barrier.
You may still be working on the details, but what's hard to reconcile is if he's heading eastbound and all of the concrete barriers are on the south side of the highway, how does he damage the driver's side?
Well, as you take the exit, though, the barriers, I'm not intimately familiar with this particular exit, but as you take the exit, I would assume that the vehicle contacts a barrier on the left-hand side, or as I mentioned before, it could well be some piece of construction equipment that was in the construction zone. At any rate, we know that he had some contact with something significant enough to cause major damage to an SUV and ultimately take the tire off.
Do you know what kind of SUV it was?
I don't have that. So we do have Coban video, however, I add the vehicles, Coban is a system that's in cars. The cars were some distance away. Whether or not they picked up the audio portion of this, we haven't reviewed the uploads yet, but we won't have video of it because the vehicles weren't in close proximity to where the arrest occurred.
Do you have any more details about the protection
just to clarify, was the first 911 call that started this whole thing made by a member of the construction crew to alert you?
Yes, the first call came in at 1:26, and it was a worker within the construction zone that alerted us to the existence of a potentially impaired driver on 520.
Can either of you clarify, so he is in jail at the moment, what happens next now with him?
While you're up there, has the vehicle been impounded? Has the warrant been searched, often put out for to be searches, anything in the vehicle suspicious?
And can you provide a photo?
So the first question is, we applied and obtained a search warrant for Mr. Sherman's blood. We did not apply, nor do we intend to obtain a search warrant for the vehicle. And I'm sorry,
Is it possible to get a photograph of the vehicle?
I don't know if we have one, but if we do, we will certainly make that available through a public disclosure request. So,
Was the vehicle impounded?
yes,
Is it here in Redmond or with you at Washington Patrol?
it was not. It was impounded just to a local tow company.
Chief, you mentioned accident on this. We covered the scene questions.
His wife just moved.
Okay.
Um,
So point of clarification, then in-laws, we can remove the X title. So as you guys know, this is a active and ongoing investigation, so details will continue to evolve as the day goes on. The question I was asked to come back and address was, yes, as my understanding, he is still in jail, given the fact that there is a domestic violence component to what he was charged for. He would have to see a judge before bail is set, and then at that point in time, he would have the right to make bail just like anyone else would.
What would you say to this? The mother-in-law had said that Richard is welcome to the home, that this is a misunderstanding. Is there any misunderstanding that you're aware of?
At this point in time, no, but as I said, the investigation is ongoing, so things can and oftentimes change. So if for some reason it changes, then that information will need to be provided to the prosecutor's office, and then they can decide accordingly, how this case moves on.
What do your officers describe as, I guess, demeanor at the home? Was he intoxicated? Was he immediately confrontational? Could you repeat that sequence of events?
Okay, so I don't know if he was immediately confrontational. We received the 911 call from the occupants of the residence indicating that he was trying to forcibly make his way inside of the residence. I'm told that at a point in time when they made contact with Mr. Sherman, that there was a amicable conversation that occurred, and it is my understanding that things were no longer amicable when he was advised that he was going to be taken into custody, and that occurred some 10 minutes after initial contact was made with Mr. Sherman.
Why was it told you to be taken into custody in relation to the incident of 9/20?
So as I understand it, that the officers developed probable cause to take him into custody for the charges that he was booked for. And with that, I'll take one more question.
He indicated why he was there. Did he try to explain to you what he was doing when you were trying to effect the arrest?
I'm not aware that Mr. Sherman made any statements to the officers that arrested him. Okay.
We got a history calls of this nature.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just one more. I just wanted to follow up about the trooper who had previously done the valet work. Do you have any more details about that?
So my understanding is one of the troopers that was involved in the arrest had previous contact with Mr. Sherman as he was a valet, I think as a teenager, tried to use that contact in a means to de-escalate and calm the situation. That seemed to be effective. My understanding is that the volatility of Mr. Sherman was up and down, but generally, as they tried to de-escalate and calm the situation down, that was one of the techniques that was utilized to make some sort of a connection or a bond between the officers that were present and Mr. Sherman.
Maybe this might be, I'm sorry, was it an officer that was slightly injured? Was that the canine or an actual human officer? I know it gets referred to as
So my understanding is I had one trooper that suffered minor injuries during the arrest. My understanding was one Redmond officer suffered some minor injuries during the arrest. Mr. Sherman suffered some minor injuries from the canine during the arrest.
Can you specify what the injuries to the officer were?
The scrapes, minor. None required medical treatment. But
Would it have been Mr. Sherman's first option to submit to a breathalyzer? Did he refuse that? Is that what?
he was being treated at the medical facility, so because of the inaccessibility to a breathalyzer or a an instrument, then we apply for a search warrant and just do a blood draw at the hospital, simply for the ease of everybody involved and time, because this is impairment is a fleeting evidence, so the sooner we can collect that evidence, the better, more reliable it is in court.
And how long typically, I know toxic screens take a long time, would this one be expedited, or how long?
This arrest, from our perspective, and I think safe to say from Redmond's perspective, is being treated no differently because of the high-profile nature of the involvement. There will be no expediting of the blood results because of status. The process will play out as it does for everybody else. I mean, it's just an unfortunate set of circumstances that he's associated with it, but this is, relatively speaking, an unfortunate everyday occurrence with somebody driving impaired, making poor choices to drive in the first place, and then finding them in the situation that they're in. So I just want to be very cautious that, well, I understand that it's high profile, I understand that a lot of media interest, these type of arrests occur sadly every single night. The fortunate part about this arrest, nobody was seriously injured. Nobody was injured at all because of the driving issues, and nobody was seriously injured as a result of the arrest. So one more question. Pardon me?
Did you tell you how he got in the crash site, the house?
No, I don't have that information.
Captain, would you mind just weighing in again on what you were told they had to get involved in terms of trying to affect the arrest, sort of describing that scene for me in terms of Mr. Sherman's reaction to the initiation of an arrest?
Well, I guess I don't understand the question.
I think initially that you had said that when they tried to arrest him, he resisted arrest and that your troopers needed to jump in and help as well. So if you just sort of describe
So we had 4 troopers present. One of them assisted in the effecting of the arrest. As he was walking away from the officers, he walked towards the troopers, and one trooper did take him to the ground, suffered no injuries as a result of that takedown, but he was taken to the ground. I don't have that.
Was it the same trooper that got involved with the arrest that had the rapport with him when he was
Yes, yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Doug, which one's yours?